Hi again, it's Marion from Wool Thread Paint, and for this tutorial I'm going to show you how to make this square for the centre of the 9 patches for the NOEL 9 patch Christmas blanket. Now it's done with a slightly different type of granny square from the others, and it has a little bit of what's called surface embroidery done on the top to give it the look of a little Christmas parcel. So I'm working with Stylecraft Special in pomegranate and cream, and as you can see this square is what's called a solid granny square. It's worked with more stitches to make it a more dense square than the traditional granny square, but it starts off in exactly the same way. So I'm going to take my pomegranate and do the first round by chaining 4. Move that out of the way. So I will chain 4 and slip stitch into the first chain to make a circle, and then chain 2, which is the equivalent of the first treble stitch, 1 treble and 2 trebles, and then chain 2. Oops, I'm slipping away from the camera there. And then 3 trebles into the circle, oops, 3 trebles and chain 2, and then 3 more trebles and chain 2, and finally the last group of 3 trebles. And then I do something just a little bit different. The great thing about crochet is that there are always tips and tricks to help you to do little bits that can otherwise be tricky. So what I'm going to do here, normally with a normal granny square I would chain 2, slip stitch into the top of the first chain 2. But here, what I want to do, if I was to do that, then I would end up with my yarn at the left hand side of the corner, and I'm wanting to start with my yarn in the middle for the next round. That sounds a bit strange, but it will maybe be more self-explanatory. What I'm going to do is, instead of chaining 2, I'm going to yarn over and I'm going to go into the top of the first chain 2, and I'm going to make a half treble stitch. So I'm going to pull my hook through, yarn over and pull through all 3. And what that actually means is, if you can see it, is that my loop on my hook is now right bang in the middle of that corner. The other difference with these solid granny squares is that, unlike the simple granny squares where I turn my work after each round, this one is all going to be worked on the front. So there I'm ready to start my next round. I'm not changing colour at this point, so I'm going to chain 2 and then I'm going to put 1 treble into that corner. Okay, so we've got 1 treble and 1 chain 2. Now I'm going to work along in the top of each of those 3 treble stitches, and you know when you do a treble stitch, as I said before, you have a post and you have a flat stitch on the top. That flat stitch on the top tends to be slightly to the left of the actual post of the stitch, and so it means that often when you're doing this solid granny square, the very first loop or the first stitch that you're going to work into is hidden by the stitches that you've just made. and you have to give it a little tug to find it, because if I go to this first, or this third one of this group, and that's its stitch at the top, so that's 1, 2, you'll see that that is the first stitch that we're going to work into. So you have to give it a good tug to make it pop up, and then yarn over, put your hook. This one is probably the trickiest one to get your hook into, and it's going to look strange, but it's, there we go, and make your first treble stitch through that first stitch, and then you can work along the top. Make sure you pick up 2 loops of that stitch rather than just one. That's another treble and a third. Then you come to the next corner, and we're going to do 2 trebles in that corner and 2 chains, and then 2 more trebles. So that's 2 trebles, 2 chains, and 2 more trebles, and then we're ready to come along the other side. So again, looking at these, that's one stitch, that's this another stitch, and this is the very first stitch that you're going to work into. So you work your treble in that, 2 and 3. And you can see that it's making a nice square, and it's more dense than the granny square. And I've chosen this because I want to get a good solid square for embroidering on to make it into a parcel. So there we have the next corner. So it's chain 2, no sorry, treble 2, chain 2, treble 2, and once more I'll show you those 3 stitches, 1, 2, and that's that one in there. Put your hook in, make your treble stitch, and 3. Now it's really important to get 3 stitches along that end, that side, and I'll just zip through this quickly. So we've got treble 2, chain 2, treble 2, and we're on our last 4th side of this round 2. So again, find that little stitch there which is hiding, and make your first treble along the row, and second and third, and then we finish off by doing treble 2 and now we don't need to do the half treble stitch in this part because we're changing colour, so I don't need to have my yarn in the middle of the corner, so I can just chain 2 and slip stitch and cut the yarn. So that's the main centre of the square done, and once it's pulled up tightly and made nice and firm, it makes a nice solid square. Now I'm going to work another 2 rows of this treble stitch around the square, and then we'll leave it at that before we do the embroidery part. So at any corner, and I tend to avoid the corner where we've just finished just to make it easier. I haven't turned it, it's still on the front, and I'm going to attach my yarn and chain 2 as usual. 1, 2, and then 1 treble in the corner. Now in that last round we had 3 stitches to work into, but as you can see we've grown quite a bit in this next round, and in actual fact there are 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 stitches to work into, and that's because we had 3 stitches and then 2 on each corner, so that's made it up to 7. And again, you want to make sure that you get 7 stitches in. So if you go to the very last stitch and count backwards, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, you'll see again half hidden is the 7th one, where we're going to start with our first treble of the side. So we can, if you know that you've got 7 there, it's easy just to work along. And this is the last one, and then we've got the corners again, so that's treble 2 and chain 2 and treble 2. And what I'm going to do is work around. You get the idea with this one, so I'm going to work around with my 7 stitches on each side, as well as the treble 2 in each corner, and I'll see you when I get back to this point here. Right, so I've worked all the way around with my cream yarn, and I'm back to the corner where I started, and I'm not going to be changing colour for the next round. It's still going to be cream, so I'm going to do the same thing I did after the first round of the pomegranate, and I'm going to make a half treble into that first chain, and that keeps my stitch right in the middle of the corner, so I can chain 2 and treble into the corner to continue along. And like before, we've grown quite a bit again, and you'll find that there is 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11 stitches along each side. So you would do that in exactly the same way, and when you get back to the beginning, you just treble 2 in the corner, chain 2 and finish off. So I'm going to put that to one side, and we have what's called surface embroidery to do, which is this part here on here, to make it look like a little parcel. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to finish off the ends on here first, and I'll come back to you ready to start with the surface embroidery. So everything's been neatly sewn in. If you're wondering why I've left this outside end, I always tend to leave the ends on the outside edge until it's been joined, because if you start sewing in around the edge, it can muddy the waters when it comes to trying to find the stitches when you're doing your joining stitches. So I usually leave the last end until it's been joined to the rest of the blanket. Now we're on the front of the square at this point, but I'm going to flip it. And what I've got is my cypress coloured Stylecraft Special. You want a length that's not too long. A working length should be about 12 inches in length. If it's any longer, there's a risk of it tangling. And you don't put a knot or anything in the end. What we're going to do is we're going to look at this row of stitches for the pomegranate, and you can see that there's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, and that means that there will be a stitch in the middle, which is the very center of the square. And I'm going to put my needle in, just pick up a little bit of that pink yarn and pull, gently pull. The whole point about doing embroidery of any type, and particularly when you're embroidering on top of crochet, is that you're gentle with your yarn. You don't pull too tightly, just try to be relaxed with it. So I'm going to pull this through until it almost disappears like that, and then I'm going to do it once more. Just pick up the little stitch, and this time I'm going to pierce. Can you see that? Pierce my green yarn a little bit as well. I'm going to put my thumb over that end, and I'm going to pull through tightly, and that makes a nice firm starting stitch for the embroidery. You can at this point, if you like, just snip off that little bit that was sticking up. These are not the best scissors in the world. I think my granddaughter has been playing with them. Right, so this, as I said, is the reverse. We want to do our embroidery on the front, but we started off our yarn on the back. Then I'm going to bring my needle through that middle stitch, just round about where it joins on to the cream, and pull it through. And then from now on, we're going to work it all on the front. So what we're going to do is we're going to make a line of what's called chain stitch going right up until it joins with the middle stitch at the other side. And to do a chain stitch, what we want to do is put your yarn over to one side and go back in with your needle exactly where you started. And this is possibly the trickiest part, because we're working through stitches as opposed to fabric. Sometimes you've got to just guess where you think you want your needle to go, because there might be a space or a stitch in the way or something. But this one, we're going to try and keep our chain stitches roughly the same size, and I've just made a stitch that's about, I don't know, is that about 1/2 centimetre? Now the important thing with chain stitch is, because I've got my yarn up like that and I pull my needle through on top of that yarn, and if you pull it, it makes a chain on the surface. And then you can put your yarn to the top again to one side, put your needle in. Now you're not going on the outside of the chain, you're putting your needle in where the yarn has come out, and you pick up another stitch which is roughly the same size, and do the same thing again. Put your yarn to one side, put your needle into the chain and pick up another stitch. Now it is possible that you might go a little bit squint, doesn't really matter. You've got the guide of the very centre of the square to let you know that you're going in the right direction, and we're halfway there, so we're going to go up another stitch, and remember this is always on top of the yarn, and you don't pull the chains too tightly either, because when you do that you lose the look of the chain. It just goes into a straight line. You can see what I've done there. Now this is the middle stitch we're aiming for on the other side, so if we try to avoid going into a big hole, because that will just make your stitch, it'll just pull it down to where to there and make a small stitch. So you can pierce your yarn to make the right size of stitch, and I reckon one more should take us up to the, if this starts to tangle, by the way, just do that and let it untangle. Right, we're going up to where we joined onto the cream, and there's our first line done. And to finish off that first line, you can put your needle in on the outside. So you can do that with a little stitch, and that just anchors that down. And that's our first part. This is like a ribbon being tied around a parcel. So at this point I'm going to do something to try and make it look a little bit like maybe a bow at the top of the parcel. So I'm going to make 4 large chain stitches coming from that centre. So here, this is what I'm going to do. I'm going to go in where that last chain was, and I'm going to pick up a much bigger stitch. And if you think about them going 1, 2, 3 and 4, so this is the first one, so it's going away to the side like that, and it needs to be finished off individually, these ones. So I'm going to put my needle on the outside of that, and then I'm going to come back and do another one. So that's going up to about here, and make another stitch. I have given myself a little bit of a tight squeeze as far as my yarn is concerned. So I'm going to go in. This is always going back into the same place, come through and pick up another chain and finish it off by going round on the outside. If I'm lucky, I will have enough yarn left to do one more. Be a bit of a tight squeeze, as I said, but we should manage it. There we go. They don't have to be deadly accurate and even. Finish off by going through to the back. And that is the bow at the top of the parcel. So it's time to just weave your end in at the back to finish off. And that's the first part of the embroidery done. Now what I did with mine was I did exactly the same thing again, and I started at the middle and I worked straight across. This time I didn't put the bow on the side because this is the horizontal part of the bow going around the parcel. So you would just start it in the same way, on the wrong side with a double stitch, and then come through on that middle pink stitch and work straight up using the center of the square as a guide where to go, right up to that middle stitch there, and then finish off, and you have a nice little parcel for a feature square in the blanket.